Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Amir Kirkwood, Chief Lending and Investment Officer at OFN. Thank you for joining for our closing plenary. I have the honor of introducing two powerful voices from the corporate and private equity sectors who have recognized the importance of CDFIs. As we rise to meet the challenges of 2020 and beyond, it is deeply inspiring to have their support. CDFIs are about partnership, innovation, and creating opportunity in those communities that are often forgotten. But our work is not done alone. The economic disruptions caused by the pandemic has highlighted the need for a robust response from government, mainstream finance, corporations, philanthropy, nonprofits, and other community stakeholders. First, we will hear from the Senior Vice President and Chief Financial Officer of Alphabet and Google, Ruth Cora. Ms. Porat's trailblazing leadership has taken her from Wall Street and Morgan Stanley to Silicon Valley, where she's been a leader at Google since 2015. Next, we will hear from Robert F. Smith, founder, chairman, and CEO of Vista Equity Partners. Mr. Smith is a leading hedge fund manager investing in minority-led technology companies globally, and perhaps best known for surprising the 2019 class of Morehouse College with the news that he would personally pay off their student debts. A year ago, we would not have predicted that these two individuals representing the heights of corporate America would join us on stage. The unique times we face in America, and persons of color, rural, and native-owned businesses especially, makes their participation here so important. We hope today is just the start of a new wave of corporate interest and participation in CDFIs. Before we hear from our two distinguished corporate speakers, we have a few elected and administration officials who want to express their support for all you do.
Hi, everyone. This is Senator Chuck Schumer. My dad was a small businessman. He had a little, rather unsuccessful exterminating business, so I know how tough times are for small business people in general. And of course, these times are tougher than ever for all small businesses, and particularly those in underserved areas, rural, inner city, and so many others. Businesses have struggled greatly over the last few months, but I want to thank all of you for your work. Community-based lenders like CDFIs are essential to assuring that truly small, rural, underserved, inner-city communities can get federal access. That's why I fought for Congress and the federal government to back you however we can. When the PPP was first instituted, the implementation was a mess. Far too many small businesses in need were overlooked. Many of you gave us feedback on how we could fix it. So during COVID-3.5, I fought for an additional $120 billion to replenish the program, including $60 billion for small and mid-sized banks and community-based lenders like CDFIs. It's why I pressured Secretary Mnuchin to create a set-aside of $10 billion solely for CDFI depository institutions. And thankfully, they have heeded our request most recently for the creation of such a set-aside for CDFIs. We've also passed legislation, as you know, to make PPP more flexible. The loan forgiveness period goes from 8 to 24 weeks, giving small businesses greater flexibility in the use of funds for fixed costs and extending the rehiring deadline to the end of the year. But we have much more work to do. Please urge your senators to support the HEROES Act that passed the House and is awaiting action in the Senate. It proposes additional PPP set-asides for lending through CDFIs and MTIs and for dedicated assistance to very small businesses. It also proposes a critical investment of $1 billion in our CDFI network throughout the country. These investments and reforms are essential to getting through this crisis and for addressing historical, systematic disparities faced by businesses and communities of color. And supporting you is crucial for making that happen. So thanks for your work. I hope all of you are safe, and my very best wishes for the rest of the year.
Hi, everyone. Jody here from the CDFI Fund. Thank you, Lisa, OFN Board of Directors, for giving me a chance to provide a quick address during this year's virtual Small Business Forum. First, let me say thank you. Thank you to all of you who remain resolute in your mission to provide access to capital and credit to the micro enterprises and small businesses across the country. The last few months have been tough, and I think it's a good time to remind you of the collective impact that you all had. Last year alone, you made over $15 billion to small businesses and micro enterprises across the country. That's no small feat. And while it may seem that that's a drop in the bucket compared to what we need to do now, it's a good reminder of how much you can do under the best circumstances and how much you will do even under these extenuating circumstances. We are keeping track of all the work that is happening. There are over 300 CDFIs who are PPP lenders, and they've made over $7 billion in loans since the inception of the program. We are keeping track of all of the work that you all are doing with the state and local governments, with philanthropies and large banks to access credit for small businesses. We're keeping track of all of the counseling and small business planning that you all are doing, and it's really impressive. It is impact. We may not see the same numbers we saw last year, but we'll see something different. We'll see the example of why CDFIs exist. CDFIs are there. They're in the thick of it. When we have economic challenges, healthcare challenges, societal and structural challenges to how we operate as a country, CDFIs are there to help lessen those inequalities, to help bridge the gap, and to step into the breach. And for that, I say thank you. So the CDFI Fund, we're plugging along. We've got our normal programming going, and we're working to get the funds out to you as soon as possible to help support the great work that you're doing. But with all that, again, thank you, and I'm happy to participate in today's forum. I'm actually a registered participant, so look me up in the chat if you want to say hi. Thank you.
For the past 3 months, OFN has been working diligently with our newest partner, Google. We've spent many evenings and weekends on Google Hangouts, fine-tuning the details of our new $170 million Grow with Google Small Business Loan Fund and a $10 million Google.org grant program. We've gotten to know many Googlers, Google's term for their employees, who share our passion for small businesses. Now we get to meet Senior Vice President and CFO, Ruth Cora. Among her many professional accomplishments, Ruth was previously Executive Vice President and Chief Financial Officer of Morgan Stanley. She serves as Vice Chair of Stanford University's Board of Trustees and a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Please welcome Ruth Cora and OFN President and CEO, Lisa Mensah.
Ruth, welcome. Welcome to OFN and to the largest virtual gathering we have ever hosted. Now, normally we are in Chicago, and this would be an in-person event, but we're adapting. So welcome very much to OFN. And all of us have had to adapt over the past few months, with working from home being the new normal. So I want to kick this interview off with you to say, how's it been going? How have you found the transition to working from home?
Well, first, it's great to be with you. It's great to be with everyone here on this virtual live stream here. Frankly, I would say it might be hard to go back to the office. I have spent more time in quarantine with 2 of our 3 sons than at any time since they were in high school, and that has been great. We cook together, and my skills there are quite mediocre, but they learned how to cook in college, so I'm learning from them. My husband is the dishwasher, and our 3rd son lives not too far away, and we periodically get him over for some socially distanced dinner, and he's in full hazmat gear, but he's there. So that's been the good part. I would say from a Google perspective, when we started to transition to work from home, it felt daunting, but then it became quite seamless. And sometimes I actually think I work more efficiently because there are absolutely no distractions, which for someone like me probably isn't the best thing. But I do appreciate how seamless the transition was. And I know that's because we have the tools. That we live in the cloud, we live on Google Collaborative Docs, G Suite, and not everyone has those types of tools and systems. And so I think the importance of some of the topics I expect we're going to cover today, we're at Google, we're doubling down to help those most in need to get the digital skills they need. I think it's really striking that 1 in 3 small business owners have said that without digital tools, they would have had to close all or part of their business during the COVID crisis. And so at Google, we're focused on what we can do to really help ensure that everyone has the opportunity to keep up.
It's really great to hear. And in a way, if we had to go through a pandemic, thank God it's 2020 and we can, at least we have Google. So I want to, before we get into talking more about the theme of this, I wanted to hear a little bit about your journey to the seat you now hold. And I can assure you, you are among friends here. This audience reveres chief financial officers. We are a room of financial professionals. All of us are CDFIs, financial institutions, and we know that we couldn't exist without professionals who know how to raise the money, get the money in, actually lend the money out, get it repaid. That's our work. I was thinking about, you and I share some years in New York in the banking sector of the late 80s when shoulder pads were in, when, email was just starting, when women in banking were quite rare. I bailed and went to the Ford Foundation. You managed to stay. So say a little bit about what kept you in finance and the kind of career junctures that you saw. What kept you there?
Well, I certainly started in banking when it was not easy to be a woman in banking. And I haven't thought about those shoulder pads for a long time, the bow ties, the cigars, the scotch, the horrible efforts to fit in. But what kept me in banking was really the opportunity to keep learning and growing. I really feel like I had the opportunity to work with some of the most extraordinary leaders at Morgan Stanley. They gave me terrific growth opportunities. And I also felt at Morgan Stanley, I was working with clients who were leaders in their industries, including what we often refer to as first of a kind companies. In fact, I had the incredible privilege to work on Google's IPO 16 years ago. And so, it was great to see the vision, the mission, the drive of Google at an early stage. And I would say that much like the current crisis environment, one of the highlights of my career was advising the U.S. Treasury Department during the 2008 financial crisis. And I was able to use the skills I developed over a career for something that was so important at that moment in time for the country. And then after that, I had the opportunity to become the CFO of Morgan Stanley and went from advising clients to actually working with a phenomenal CEO who was still leading the firm. And there was a lot we had to do to come out of the financial crisis. But I felt like I wanted to try one more thing, and tech was something that I had done quite a bit in my career. I'd actually run Morgan Stanley's tech equity capital markets business and tech banking business for a while. I have a tight connection with Stanford, was spending a lot of time in California as a result of that. And given I've known Google since inception and am passionate about the company, when the opportunity was presented, I said yes on the spot. So, it has been an extraordinary journey. I think your opening comment, though, I think reminds me also that my journey, I had people who bet on me, who helped me through that journey, who gave me these stretch opportunities. And I think very importantly, they were all men because there were so few women in banking. So the one point that I would say is the person doesn't need to look like you. They just need to be someone who is smart and confident in themselves, so they give you space to run and grow, and working with and for the right person can make all the difference in the world.
Boy, I would so wholeheartedly agree, but it's really good to hear yours. Well, I'm glad there are a few of those people at Morgan Stanley because we need your leadership. And so let me turn a little bit to the theme of our work today, the small business theme. And when you think about Google, its products span so many industries, and you support businesses of all types, the nonprofits, governments, schools, small businesses to be sure, large corporations, But your partnership with us, the Opportunity Finance Partnership, is primarily focused now on supporting small businesses. And I think it would be interesting for our group to hear what was important about the small business sector and to Google, and why does it make sense for you all to support small businesses in this partnership?
Well, it's so core to where we're focused and what we care about. We look at small businesses as the lifeblood of the American economy. I mean, I think that the stats say it all. 2/3 of new jobs are from small businesses. They employ almost half of Americans, about half of US GDP. 67 cents of every dollar spent on a small business stays in a local community. I love that stat. It's reinvesting and re-energizing the local communities. And I think very much some of the opening comments today, I heard people are talking about something that we are quite focused on, which is right now in this crisis, SMBs are disproportionately affected. And so for us, it was very natural, and we viewed it as absolutely critical to lean into this at this moment in time. And I'm so pleased to be having this conversation with you. You know, at Google, we do have a long history of helping small businesses, whether connecting them with customers or helping them run their businesses or teaching them essential digital skills. They were our first partners. And I would say one of the things that we're really excited about is the work we're doing in digital transformation. Our Grow with Google program, which we're obviously doing with OFN as well, is all about economic opportunity. And what we've done through Grow with Google is we've trained people in small businesses in all 50 states in the key skills that they need to succeed in increasing the digital, being present and as successful as possible in the digital economy.
No, I think it's something that we had to learn and we were surprised. So your presence here today is really amplifying that message. But to be sure, this is really a unique moment for our economy. And in every way, Google's investment in OFN is a breakthrough, frankly, for corporate America in investing in the CDFI sector. We called this whole interview with you Stepping Up, because in so many ways, you guys keep stepping up. And we're not the first partner, CDFI partner. Last spring, you partnered with the Housing Trust of Silicon Valley, another OFN member. And you did this to support affordable housing in the Bay Area. And that was a $1 billion commitment to make housing more affordable in the Bay Area. That was in normal business cycles. But you found us in the middle of a pandemic. And you were willing to step up to make the first $5 million of grant and the first $125 million loan to OFN. And with this, we expect that we're going to touch at least 50 CDFIs with your loans and another 25 with your grants. You are truly a first mover. And so I think this is such an interesting point because you're a first corporate mover in the time of crisis. And I wondered if you could share why us? It's a little tough question because you've made the decision, but why did you decide to bank on us now at a time of crisis?
Well, I love the way you framed it, stepping up. That our view was that there is a crisis going on. And as I've said, in particular for small, medium businesses, and we're thrilled to be working with OFN because you give us the opportunity to really magnify the impact that we hope to have to be helpful. We have teams that are working every day to create new tools and products to help SMBs succeed online. And when we were thinking even more broadly, what we're really inspired by is CDFI's really inclusive mission to focus on underserved communities and geographies. And when we looked at all that you're doing, all that OFN is doing, and how CDFIs work to fill this gap, it's so critical, in terms of access to capital for small, medium businesses, especially in underserved communities and communities of color. Our view was we're honored and delighted to be working with you. And I think that it goes to this whole point that you have important expertise that can increase our ability to have an impact. You have closer relationships with SMBs and their communities. You understand the needs of the local community. You provide specific services to the borrowers and then are able to really address systemic barriers to capital that are faced by minority and women-owned businesses. And it's, I think, so striking that many small businesses are started. Everyone in this group will know this, but just the fact that small businesses are started with personal assets and loans that are typically guaranteed with one's net worth. But if you start with the types of wealth disparities that we have in society, only 20% of small businesses are minority owned, only about the same, 21% are women owned. It's an outgrowth of that initial disparity. And so our view is that the opportunity to work with you, the opportunity to work through CDFIs is really vital to bridging the gap. And we're really pleased to be able to partner in this way. And I think the other really key point to us is we're not a financial institution. We don't intend to become a financial institution. So the most natural step is for us to look for an opportunity to partner with the best in class in this area to really magnify the impact that we could otherwise have. So we're really delighted with the partnership and look forward to all we're able to do together.
Thank you for going a little deeper in that question. And to hear a corporate leader refer to our expertise, where there's a room of hundreds of people listening to this, and we're not often praised for our unique expertise. So I want to thank you for that and for seeing it. And I hope all the CDFIs who are out there can get a good listen here, because this is important to us, that you've understood how we look at our communities and how we look at these questions that bedevil us as a country, these deep wealth gaps. You've raised the issue of race and of gender and of the unequal things that we see in our country. And that's certainly where we stand now as a country, with more awareness of that. That's clearly been heightened in recent events. We are confronted with the great disparities that happen in race and gender. And even if we faced gender discrimination trying to come up in banking, it is now so apparent that we face those in this country. But I'm curious how Google is in fact looking at racial and gender disparities across the society. And in the business context, how are you looking at closing those gaps as a company?
Well, the senior most levels we're extremely focused. Our view is this is an extraordinary moment in history. And hopefully it is the moment in history that changes race relations and really addresses racial inequality. It must happen. There is no more time. And so at Alphabet, at Google, we're taking a hard look at ways we can help to address systemic racism against the Black community. And we're very committed to making a difference through our products and through investments like what we're talking about here today. And we're coming at it with a real sense of urgency. The time for change is now. I think when we're talking about it, our view is that systemic inequities like the racial wealth gap create significant disadvantages for minority communities, which is why we're so focused on providing Black, Latinx and other underserved communities with more equitable access to capital through our OFN partnership. And we're looking at what we can do through products and investments and grants. So as an example, we also announced a new $12 million commitment to make grants to organizations that are working to address racial injustice. Our first 5 grants were $1 million each. They've gone to some of our long-term partners like the Equal Justice Initiative and the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. We're also very focused on what we can provide through our engineers and our products. So for example, we're providing technical support through our google.org fellows program. We're also building on donations we've made over the years. 32 million we've donated to racial justice over the past 5 years. And then we're looking as another item, offering 25 million in ad grants to help organizations that are focused on fighting racial injustice. And I think one of the things I'm really proud of is seeing how mobilized our employees are. They're stepping up and giving. And in fact, we've had the largest Googler giving campaign in our company's history. And that's as measured both by dollars and by the breadth of participation. So, I would say that we view this as really a critical time in history for all of us. And we're working very closely as a leadership team with our Black community at Google to develop initiatives and products, product ideas that can support long-term solutions. And we're going to be talking more about that over the weeks and months ahead.
We just couldn't have had you here at a more important time, Ruth. And I think I would have thought somebody was crazy if they told me I'd be sitting here in June of 2020, one of the leaders of Google, discussing the racial wealth gap. It feels like I should be back at an Aspen event or something else, but I appreciate you leaning in and just saying something. We are holding this conversation today, and this was a day of breaking news from your CEO, who just announced some of the things you referenced, but even an extended support to us. Would you like to share a little good news with the group here a little more?
I would be delighted to share it. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, so no, we're very excited. As part of our effort to support the Black community today, our CEO, Sundar Pichai, announced a series of major commitments to improve racial equity inside and outside of Google. And that does include an additional commitment of $50 million in loans and Google.org grants to CDFIs supporting Black-owned small businesses through OFN. And we are absolutely thrilled to be expanding our work together. Really excited about this and the impact that together we can have. And then over the past few weeks, we've been brainstorming ways to provide additional support to Black communities. And given recent events in the news and the significant demand for loans from OFN's network, we thought upsizing our fund from $130 million to $180 million could be a great way to demonstrate that support. So excited about what more we can be doing together. Thank you.
Well, that is just a powerful announcement. I can't believe that it's happened today, right, when we're gathered for the Small Business Finance Forum. It is really wonderful. Many in this network go to work not for any notoriety or any recognition, but for the purpose of the work they do. And to be given recognition and to have you with us means so much. It's a powerful announcement. We are ready to upsize this with you. We'll be having a busy year supporting many, many CDFIs with these resources. But Ruth, it's my job just to thank you very much and to thank your teams. Pulling this off in the midst of a pandemic online, our partnership and your joining us today means everything. And so I really look forward to the future. And I hope you feel the hundreds of people with me on this call who are saying thank you for joining us.
Well, thanks to you and thanks to all of the amazing work being done around the country. This is so critically important and we're honored to be a part of it. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth and Lisa. And on behalf of all OFN members, we're thrilled to welcome Google into the CDFI industry. And now we'll hear from a CDFI legend, Bill Bynum, CEO of Hope Enterprise Corporation, and his distinguished guest, Robert F. Smith. You may have seen Robert talking about CDFIs on Meet the Press, where he referred to CDFIs as the capillary banking system. Robert is the founder, chairman, and CEO of Vista Equity Partners. Vista oversees a portfolio of 65 enterprise software, data, and technology-enabled companies. Among his many other engagements, Robert serves on the board of directors for the Business Roundtable and the board of overseers of Columbia Business School. In 2012, Smith was named by Forbes as one of the 100 greatest living business minds. Please welcome Robert Smith and Bill Bynum.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am so excited to be here with OFN, but particularly honored to be here with my friend Robert Smith. Robert has been one of the strongest voices for equity in the recovery after the pandemic that we've had. And I just want to say, Robert, thank you for being here with us today and making time in what I know is a very, very busy schedule. I'd like to jump right into our conversation. It's just saying that other than a guy from Hope, Arkansas named Bill Clinton, you may be the most prominent champion for CDFIs in the history of our sector. And so I'd like to start by asking you to talk a bit about what has made you become such a strong advocate for minority depository institutions and CDFIs, and why have you taken to referring to us as the capillary banking system?
Again, thanks, Bill. So good to see you, and thank you for inviting me to spend time amongst your family and peers here. And I'm just honored to be here and frankly to be a part of this fight. You know, I grew up in Denver, Colorado, as you know, at a time in the late 60s, early 70s, when there was I'll call it a whole lot of hope and optimism in our community. And, when I think about those times that, when my mother and father, and we'd go to the bank and we'd have to drive a couple miles to go to the bank. And it just, I realized as we went through the period of the 70s, the Nixon era, et cetera, how our community that was thriving with small businesses, restaurants, bakeries, kind of shops and dry cleaners and that sort of thing just seemed to evaporate. And a lot of those businesses never came back. And as I continued to pursue my career in technology, and then ultimately as we started to face this pandemic crisis, as I looked across our portfolio of 65 plus software companies, realizing, of course, I knew 1.4 million of those customers of ours are small businesses. And as we started to engage in trying to ensure that they had access to the PPP program of the CARES Act, realizing that a lot of the small businesses that I grew up with that did not recover during that economic crisis would likely have the same issue here. And so the call to action in my mind is leveraging the assets that we had, which are, our software companies, our people, and our relationships to try to not only just extend a lifeline to these small businesses in these communities, but frankly, build an infrastructure that can be leveraged going forward. And I think, Bill, with your help and your colleagues' help, I think we were able to establish some of those lifelines, strengthen them. And now I think it's our task to really focus on how do we drive capital into the communities that have been underbanked by the large banks. And it was clear to me that they have no interest in banking these communities, to be frank with you. But the critical role of the CDFIs and MDIs in these communities now has to not only just be accentuated, but strengthened through solutions, through capital, and through capability. So, like all things, as we get a little older, we realize that a big part of our mission has to be to leave this world a better place than how we found it. And I think this is just one of the roles I think I can serve and help.
Well, we're certainly glad that you've taken this on. It's interesting. The New York Times reported that 40% of Black businesses have closed during the pandemic. Clearly you saw this crisis coming and stepped out and took action. And I've enjoyed the opportunity to spend time with you over the past few months and have seen how important this is to you. You're constantly on calls with White House, with Treasury officials, with heads of some of the largest financial institutions on the globe. And still, not many people in your position would have taken on the cause of fighting for the survival of Black-owned businesses and entrepreneurs. And what is it that prompted you to act so boldly and to pull out your Rolodex and use it as effectively as you have?
And Bill, again, thank you for spending the time educating me on the call it the topography of this industry, and making introductions to a number of the leaders so that I could be, understand the current state of the CDFI networks, MDI networks and capacity, and then B, think about ways to enable a higher scale of activity. Again, it comes back to growing up and seeing just some very vibrant businesses in this neighborhood that I grew up in disappear when we had financial crisis. And as I went through, late high school, college, coming back and seeing these businesses never recover, never opened. The real estate in those areas, the malls, the strip malls that they were in, kind of fell into disrepair. The property values went down. I call it the hopelessness started to set into a number of those communities. And it isn't until recently, last few years, where I've actually seen that hope return in the form of these small businesses, a lot of them African-American and Latinx owned businesses that are now looking to serve their communities. And then, as you and I know, most small businesses maybe have 2 months of working capital, and JP Morgan had printed a study that I read that said that in essence, these businesses, African-American, Latinx businesses, have 2 weeks. And you and I talked about this 5-6 weeks ago. We said, the half-life of these businesses is, again, 4, 5, 6 weeks. And so disturbing news that we were just hearing that 41% of these businesses are no longer transacting. It isn't unexpected based on the data, but I think it was essential that we in this community of CDFI lenders did everything in their power to stave that off. And I think we have to do everything in our power now to reinvigorate those businesses and those economies, those local economies that are so essential. You know this. Half of the U.S. GDP is small to medium businesses, and these businesses, make up a 90+% of the actual employment in these communities. And frankly, it provides hope and optimism and jobs and internships. And when teenagers are looking for something to do, you go to kind of the local businesses, one of your first jobs. I think many of us had that opportunity, but if those businesses aren't there, it creates a little bit of a hole. And frankly, it creates a little bit of a challenge in one's psyche to think that the American dream, the American economy is open to you because you don't see it. And I think it's incumbent upon us beyond the financial elements that we bring to that hope, that we have to bring the idea that there is an opportunity and show these young people, if you work hard and in these businesses, and you have an opportunity to really excel and do some things in your life that you dream and aspire to. But if you don't see it, it's really hard for them to dream and go capture it.
That's so true. I've also been intrigued by how you applied different elements of your background to this challenge that we're facing. You are known as a legendary investor. Forbes refers to Vista Equity Partners as a wildly successful private equity firm known for making shrewd bets and leading the market. Lately you've been making the case for investing in CDFIs and minority depository institutions. Are there parallels here from your work at Vista? Are CDFIs and MDIs some kind of undervalued investments that you see value in before others? If so, why has it taken others so long to see the value in our work?
I think you're hitting it right on the head. Again, you have to look at my background. At the end of the day, I'm just an old process engineer, chemical engineer, and I like to think about sustainable processes that can scale, where you can use capacity, technology to create leverage, and frankly, higher degrees of return. I've affectionately kind of termed this industry the capillary banking system. And as you know, it's, you can bring all the veins and arteries you want, but it's the capillaries that actually deliver the nutrients to the cells to keep them alive and to help them thrive and remove any of the call it the waste that we don't need. And this industry is really the one that feeds our communities. And when I started to evaluate it, not only through the lens of our companies, but through the lens of these small to medium businesses, it was clear to me that these banking deserts are starving very essential sectors of our economy. I've chatted about the 70% of the African American community, for instance, that doesn't have a local branch bank of the larger banks, and the CDFIs and MDIs play that role. But yet, you look at the capitalization of these capillary banking systems, and they are, frankly, tremendously subscale. And there's two things I think that you and I have chatted about that are important. One is, frankly, to bring lending capacity at scale into this capillary banking system, and two, to modernize this capillary banking system. Everything from thinking about, customer engagement, back office, and lending capabilities, or core banking, digital banking, mobile internet, content management, analytics, mortgage lending, et cetera. All those things, I think, A, they're available today in technology solutions. B, because of the way the CDFIs and have been funded and underwritten, they are woefully under invested in these technologies, which are available. And so the second thing is, of course, putting capital, lending capacity, and the capacity to actually do, syndication and manage, call it the liquidity elements of the banks. So I think that the right idea here is, okay, if you large banks removed yourselves from these communities, then why don't you all, if you're now really focused on creating a thriving economy in the United States, let's contribute. Let's call it 2%, maybe 3% of your net income. If you take the top 10 banks, it's $970 billion of net income over the last 10 years. Let's take 3% of that, 2% of that, and drive it into the capillary banking system. Since you don't have branches there, let's figure out efficient ways to do it. You can do it through, through foundations, if you want to make the donation, or you can do it directly into the banks, create partnerships, mentorships, all those sort of relationships, but then drive true capacity in those banks over the next 10 years. Make a 10-year commitment. And don't get me wrong, I'm excited to hear a number of these large companies saying, oh, I'm going to donate 10 million, 50 million, et cetera. But if you're making, 25, 30, 40 billion a year, you should be donating 1% to 2% of that into building out the capacity that feeds these communities that not only hire, train, and employ, but actually create a fair amount of recirculative capital in that community. I think it is over 2/3 of the dollars that are spent in these small businesses and small communities stay in that community. And that actually enables the people there, enables their dignity, and enables their opportunity to actually grow and be a part of the American dream. So I'd like to think about that and propose that in call it this financial services sector. I think we do the exact same thing in healthcare. That's the exact same thing in broadband. You think about the tech world versus the call it, they think they last 10 years been $850 billion of profits, that if you took 1 or 2% of that or 3% of that to provide broadband to all the CDFIs and MDIs and community and the businesses in those communities. To me, and you do it over 10 years, again, I think that is the sort of process solution that can create real change in all American communities, urban and rural, that is funded and driven by the corporations, in addition to the capital, the mentorship, the partnering, the technical assistance, so that we actually create a more stable system. So not just the arteries and veins have the strength and capacity, but the capillaries are actually strengthened in a way that they are providing a higher volume of activity. And frankly, they know these small businesses as their customers. So you know who to lend to, who not to. And in fact, I believe your default rates are actually lower than the FDIC banking system. So that's how I think about it. That's what I think we ought to do. That's what I've been proposing to now, I say everyone who will listen in Congress, in administration, and to the BRT and others. And I think that is the sort of idea that I think we can adopt, that we can do today. We get 1 or 2 in each industry and drive that forward, Bill. And I think that will create the new model that is a sustainable model, not a one-time gift, but a sustainable model of economic development into these communities.
That is exactly the kind of system thinking that I've heard expressed in your approach. You are an engineer by training. I've certainly seen that play out. As a matter of fact, I'm recruiting for a chief program officer, and I was taken to describing that as someone, an engineer who can, understand how these pieces should work together. And, very early in the Paycheck Protection Program, you saw bottlenecks and offered MDIs and CDFIs access to one of your companies, Finastris, to help expedite the process. Can you talk a bit about this, how this experience has gone, and your thoughts about opportunities for technology to create greater access to capital and to increase capacity of CDFIs and MDIs?
Sure. Like all things, you get a chance to be informed on inequities through the eyes of yourself and through others. And as we really started to think about delivering solutions to our 1.4 million small businesses through Vista, it became clear to me through a few of my colleagues and friends at Finastra, our CEO Simon and Mike, who runs our North America practice, and said, listen, there is a call it a dearth of technological capability to interface with the E-Trans system in the CDFIs and MDIs. And I asked him and said, well, what do we need to do? And said, well, we have our system, our Laser Pro. And I said, well, fine, let's just offer the installation free and, anytime there's a transaction fee that comes out of it donated to the food banks, because Americans were hurting. I think we've donated close to $3 million from the transaction fees associated with it. And I said, any of these CDFIs that want to get enabled, let's get that done. Because you and I know if these businesses close in these communities, I mean, they often don't come back, and be generations before another one replaces it, and that just creates the cycle of despair and the blight that we were talking about. So many of the folks took us up on it, a few hundred in fact, and my team was kind of working through the weekends between the first and second of the CARES Act distributions to make sure everyone got trained and bring as much technical assistance as we could. But I still think, and as successful as it has been, I think it could be even more successful if we just continue to deliver what I'll call the drive and the interest, and we have the interest in figuring out ways to create these sustainable solutions to pump capital into these communities, these urban and rural communities that don't have quote unquote traditional banking access. And quite frankly, my sense is, as I've gotten to understand, you, Bill, and your approach and others, you actually have a keen awareness of what the communities need, much more than anyone else. And so let's feed the infrastructure that knows what that community needs. Give you the capabilities, technical capabilities, the technical assistance. And frankly, we just need to get now more capital flowing through these systems. And I think if we do that well, and I think there's some unique ways that we can do that, I think we will stand back and say we did not only the right thing, but we did a thing that's going to actually grow the U.S. economy by 10-20% just by us putting enough capital into those markets.
It's really been great to see how the industry has responded and probably doing things that, quite frankly, we never thought we could do before. My organization, for example, we do 40 to 50 commercial loans a year. Well, in the last 2.5 months, we're pushing towards 1,700 paycheck protection loans. We couldn't do that without taking advantage of technology. Obviously, you got to have amazing human capacity, but when you couple that with technology that's available, we have an opportunity to really move the needle on economic opportunity and some of the things that, quite frankly, precipitated some of the things that we're seeing today. Obviously, we are witnessing civil unrest, protests focused on systemic racism and inequality that take us back to the 60s. Our nation's financial system, the lack of people's ability to support their families, to contribute to the economy. That's, Dr. King had shifted from focusing on voting rights when he came to Memphis to talking about how do you make sure that people have the ability to support those families. That would really tamp down some of the frustration and divisiveness, quite frankly, we see. But we know that the gaps in the financial systems don't allow that to happen. It's excluded people of color from access to opportunity, whether to start a business, own a home, get an education. And so I'd really like to get your perspective on what you see as some of the needed reforms to bring more equity into the financial system. How do you see CDFIs and MDIs fitting into that solution?
I think you frame that in the exact right context, Bill. If you think about from the Homestead Act to the Southern Homestead Act to the GI Bill, to every time there was an opportunity for African Americans to capture some of the distribution that's coming from the U.S. government, there were systemic ways in which it was that they were excluded. And you can just kind of cascade through just those three narratives, and then the Fair Housing Act and the redlining and that dynamic. And if you think about it, that the last generation of Americans, the bulk of their wealth came from real estate, and the bulk of that came from a delevering of that real estate, getting GI Bill loans or whatever it might be, and then delevering those loans. But if you didn't have access to those lenders, and those lenders did not want to lend to you because of the color or hue of your skin, it inhibited your ability to actually create wealth for your family. And now you get into my generation, and if you think about now, the generation of us, quote unquote, 50 plus plus or minus year olds, the bulk of the wealth is no longer in the homes, but it's in the capital markets in the form of stocks, bonds, et cetera. But if you didn't participate in that last cycle, you're not going to really participate in this next one. So the role of CDFIs right now is really to get, in my mind, assets in the form of, in most cases, debt into these businesses and institutions to support these communities and at scale. And so rather than have, quote unquote, half of the lending capacity, well, let me put it this way, African-American businesses typically only get about half of the lending availability than half of the lending amount. So it is systemically subscale in their capacity to leverage lending institutions to actually grow their businesses. And so our role as CDFIs, as MDIs now, is to say, okay, we need to level this playing field and equalize the opportunity that is America to these communities. And it's not just African American, it's Latinx, but and rural, but it's the African American community that has disproportionately suffered based on those 4 or 5 things I just mentioned, from Fair Housing Act to the Homestead Act, Southern Homestead Act, GI Bill, et cetera. So it is the right time to do this. And there's enough liquidity of assets in the markets today. We just have to get them driven into the places where these businesses exist, enable these businesses to actually be more productive, which gets back to one of the early points. The world that I live in is enterprise software. Enterprise software is business software. Business software is the most productive tool introduced in our business economy over the last 50 years. The average software product that we sell to our customers is a 650% ROI. If you implement enterprise software in a small business, one that you might lend to, they get about a 900% ROI, plus it provides transparency to you all as the banks, lending institutions, et cetera. So I think the second part of this, or the third part of this, first part is getting capital into the CDFI, MDI networks. And I'm not talking about 50 million, I'm talking about 300 billion is sort of the right levels, the way I think about it. The second thing is to modernize the CDFI infrastructure, core banking, processing card payments, mobile, internet, voice, mortgage lending, analytics, all those sorts of things, and also enabling you all to partner with some of the large-scale banks who can enable a more, call it fluid liquidity system for you all. And then the third thing is actually modernizing the business infrastructure of the small businesses that you lend to. Payroll, processing, general ledger, scheduling software that can, for the smallest of these companies, is $50 a month, and for the largest, a few thousand a month. But the ROI on those products are hundreds of percent, which is probably the best next investment any of them would make. And that's how you can grow these businesses. And I think if you put those things together, which we have an opportunity to do now, it creates a levelization of economic opportunity that then stabilizes a lot of the communities, stabilizes the call it the hope and optimism of folks saying, I actually can progress in this country, and it's going to be this infrastructure, CDFI, MDI infrastructure, that will likely be the exact conduit to that economic level, equalization. And so that's why it's so critical that we build this infrastructure, strengthen this infrastructure using technology and capital, know-how, and assisting the small to medium businesses so that they can also modernize their infrastructure as well.
Well, I have to say, I spent a lot of time jumping on the table advocating to increase the CDFI fund budget from, hovering around 200 million to $1 billion. And and people accuse me of being, a little optimistic and aggressive in those numbers. I actually like your $300 billion a lot more than my $1 billion. So
the return on that is probably 6 to 10x over the 10 years. Yeah. And, like all things, you can't just dump it all in at once, but it is a building of capability, a building of the asset base, and then a building of I'll call it the receivability on the business side of the small to medium businesses so that they modernize along the way. And the good news is we have the ability to deliver a lot of that technical assistance remotely We need to ensure that the infrastructure is there, but all of that's available. All of that is available today. And it's actually available in what I call, monthly payments as opposed to one big asset acquisition that needs to be done. But I think we need to commit to it. We need to commit to this is an important priority for us, is to bring capital into these communities that have been underserved for decades and generations in a way that enables them to be not only self-sustaining, but participate in this global economy in an effective way. And you all are the key to that.
Well, clearly there's a viable demand, and we know that it would transform the economy if we could get these resources into the communities that need them so most, right. so desperately. There's so many interesting things in your background that we could talk about for hours. How when you were a baby, your mom carried you to the march on Washington. Your transition from a chemical engineer to an investment banker to the founding of Vista Equity Partners, or why you pledged A Phi at Cornell instead of KSI. Maybe we can talk about that.
Alpha chapter. There's it's the Alpha chapter. That is the home of it all. You know that.
All right, we'll have a conversation over that. But I'm really particularly intrigued about and inspired by your philanthropy. I mean, most of us were blown away by the incredible gift that you made to the 396 members of the 2019 graduating class at Morehouse College. And so thank you so much for that investment and how it inspired so many others. I think you're in Austin today.
I am.
Perhaps,
yes.
But I know one of our calls, you were at Lincoln Hills in Colorado, where you make outdoor education and recreation opportunities available to young people. It was one of the nation's first and few vacation resorts for owned by African Americans. And so, talk a little bit about what drives your passion for giving and how you give.
Sure, and it comes, and I've chatted about this. It's how you grow up. I grew up in a neighborhood where there was such care that I always felt, not just from my parents, but from the neighbors in my neighborhood. I noticed the love, the expression, the protection that the older people in our neighborhood, levied upon us kids as we were growing up. And, you couldn't go to the store, a couple blocks away without seeing 3 or 4 neighbors who were keeping an eye on you to make sure that you got there safely and back. And I had little businesses, lawn mowing and shoveling snow. And, my parents made sure that after I did our walk, I had to go do, Mr. Moore's walk, who was a member of the Pullman Porters Union and started that, and Miss Busby's, who was a single older woman, and do those free. And then they say, okay, now I can go and go make money. And I watched my parents, who were very civically active and socially active, in ensuring that the community of children in my neighborhood, both were elementary school teachers, ultimately got doctorates in education, but ensuring that the children in our neighborhood had access to the outdoors through camp through the YMCA's, or had access to Head Start, or ensuring that these kids had access to tutoring programs and music programs, et cetera. And they just did it because they knew that was their responsibility. So from all of that, you develop a core, a center. You figure out who you are. You figure out who you are in the context of your community, and you live that way. And so I've been fortunate that I was able to go to, again, I went to public education, elementary, junior high school, and then I went off to Cornell University. And even through that journey, realized that I had an important duty and mission that I had to ensure that my community was able to participate in not only my experiences and my success, because I knew that they had buffeted me on my way up. I just, remember heading off to college, and my aunts, that we weren't related, but we were, making sure that I had, an extra $50 for books, and giving me my first alarm clock so that I could wake up and go to class. And, that's how communities operate. And so that's part of what my role is, to do my part in our community.
Well, sir, you've done your part and more. I think I heard a comment that maybe one of the things that was really important to you is how your mom said she's proud. How you just make those who raise you feel like they've done a good job. And I certainly think that's been the case. Again, we talked a little bit about your leadership, the voice you brought to this sector and to this work. And clearly leadership is so important these days. We see how critically important it is given what's going on in the country. And while I don't imagine you've be inclined to be Treasury Secretary or Commerce Secretary or even throw your name in the hat and run for president in the future, certainly you've got a lot to offer. And if you were advising, and you are advising certainly leaders, what are some of the key recommendations, policy levers that you would advise that would get us from where we are to a more inclusive economy that creates opportunities for all?
Yeah, so I think from an economic perspective, I kind of outlined what I think makes the most sense, which is bolstering this capillary banking system with capital, wherewithal, and modernization of technology. I focus again on modernization of the small businesses and require them, if you're going to take a loan, you have to modernize as well. And I would drive, like I said, at least $300 billion into that channel over the next 10 years and be very deliberate about that. I think that economic engine in of itself would create a massive economic uplift. So that'd be point one. Point two, I would focus in areas of healthcare in terms of telemedicine for a lot of the communities. You know, we still, as an African-American community at least, have disproportionate amount of lack of healthcare and morbidity in as it relates to, certain diseases, COVID being one. But, one of my good friends who just recently passed away and, God rest his soul, Bernard Tyson did a fabulous job at Kaiser Permanente, really implementing some of the telemedicine systems that, over half of their calls were telemedicine. And I think that's an effective use of technology to actually reach communities that don't necessarily, that are underserved from a healthcare perspective. I think that we need to think about, the delivery of, I'll call it the economic justice initiatives, and we're all very focused on that now. And so I won't comment much on it, except we have to ensure that, we don't have police officers and systems that are over policing neighborhoods and frankly attacking certain parts and members of our community, African American, Latinx, et cetera, in a way that is disproportionately unfair and creating terror in these communities. And lastly, I think really about education. Education at the end of the day is one of the fundamental elements of it. We're going to introduce a program that is quite revolutionary. Hopefully later this week, we just got our 501c3 designation, which pays for and provides a self-sustaining system for STEM students at HBCUs. And I'll kind of wait and not give everybody everything on this until we make the announcement, because we have a few things to tidy up. But you have to create sustainable solutions that our young people can actually feel that they have access to this new economy, and this new economy being a digital economy, feeling like they have a chance to continue to improve their life and station in life relative to their parents, an opportunity to grow and feel the dignity of great work. So I think, when I think about it, those are the four areas that I'd focus on. And I have the great fortune of being able to serve on the board of the Business Roundtable, as was mentioned in the introduction, and driving some of those ideas, initiatives with my CEO peers of the largest companies in America, who now have a very open, willing ear and desire to do something. I think if we do it systemically, we will be able to make this old world new, in the words of Dr. King, and I'm quite excited about that prospect.
No, thank you. That is quite exciting, and hope we get there. So much of what you do is betting on the future, betting on future generations, making investments in future generations, and several of your comments have been about hope. It's so much of what you do is about hope. As we sort of move toward wrapping up, I'd like to ask you to say a few words about your hopes for, and what gives you hope for the future of the country, And then also about for CDFIs and MDIs, what are your hopes for this for the country and for this work that we do?
Yeah, I think, again, the most important thing we can do as a group of CDFIs, MDI ecosystem participants is to insist and to demonstrate, which you all have through this PPP program, the ability to manage, assets at scale. Just as you mentioned, you're doing multiples of what you did just a year ago. And as you improve your modernization of your technical infrastructure, my guess is you can do multiples again. Well, I know you can. And I think we need to, dissuade the notion that because of the size of the CDFIs and where they bank, that they're actually not a great investment. In fact, it's probably one of the best investments that we can make as a financially driven economy is to invest in this capillary infrastructure in the ways that I talked about: technology, infrastructure, technical assistance, mentoring, et cetera, and providing liquidity. So that would be the first area of hope, because I see the capacity in what you all can do under duress, being COVID. And now it's like, wow, okay, so now let's actually build sustainable infrastructure to drive that all forward. So that'd be kind of point one. In terms of what gives me hope in America, I see what's happening in the streets different than what I saw in the 60s. In the 60s, there was very much a skew to the hues, shall we say, but here, I see my kids out there, and it is a much more diverse. It is a streets that are filled with white people being allies with brown people and saying we are all people. And this is unfair for one group of our people, of us Americans, being treated so poorly in the context of justice. Started off as equitable or justice in the streets by police, and now people realizing the economic, the educational, the healthcare justice imbalance is untenable. And these young people, I'll give them credit, they went straight out there in the street. Now maybe it's because the economy was shut down, et cetera, that gave the quiet, and maybe it's God's providence again that made it quiet in that context. But they're out there. They didn't sit around and talk about it. They went and did it. And so now it's imperative that our generation does something. We are stewards of assets. We are stewards of companies. We're stewards of thought and institutions. And it's time for us to bend where the dimension and the vector on which we're on more towards the vector that creates a more equal opportunity for all Americans, irrespective of skin color and race, religion, and that, I think, is what gives me hope, that this is a big group of allies out there that I hadn't seen before that are now saying, I'm recognizing this injustice, it is wrong, and now we have to fix it. So that's what gives me hope, Bill.
Well, I think that's a perfect place to wrap up, Robert. One of the things that gives me hope is that you have chosen to bring your voice to this work and help the rest of the country see what could be if CDFIs were equipped with the tools to help people realize their potential. Thank you so much for sharing your afternoon with us, and look forward to continuing to count you as a part of the CDFI industry.
Thank you, Bill, and all the best to you.
Thank you. Take care.
Wow, what an afternoon. I am so inspired by the great discussions we've just heard. I mean, honestly, to hear from Google how they are stepping up in this moment to discuss the racial wealth gap, to hear from Robert Smith and Bill Bynum, to get a call for a 10-year investment of hundreds of billions of dollars, and to be recognized as capillaries, for Ruth Cora to recognize our expertise. I think if you're a CDFI or a CDFI partner or ally or family member, this is a good moment. So I get the happy chore of closing our event and shouting out some thanks. First to the sponsors who made this whole thing happen. Our lead sponsor, JP Morgan Chase, you sent your dollars and your people to this. We also thank deeply Wells Fargo and MUFG Union Bank, Santander Bank, Wood Forest National Bank. All of you, thank you so much. I want to also recognize our production partners. This is our first ever virtual, and we could not have done it without Linder and CMI. Thank you for all to hold our hands. We really appreciate it. Provide me with a moment to thank my own OFN home team, who has worked tirelessly, all of us virtually, over the last few months to pull this off. And I think you've gotten to see some of the amazing people that I get a chance to work with. And lastly, thanks to all of you for coming to the 2020 Small Business Finance Forum. Now, my hope is that next year we'll be back, at least with elbow bumps and good food and a glass in Chicago. And if we're really lucky, hopefully we'll see you all in person in LA. And if we're not, back to some virtual world. I also want to end with hope. I have a lot of hope for this field. I have hope for everything that's made us over the past decades and the work that remains ahead. Today is a moment, I think, to recognize this is indeed our time. We've got a lot to do to ensure a shared recovery, that America gets stronger out of this pandemic and out of this time, stronger and better. Hands, hearts, heads together. We can do it. Stay strong. Thank you very much.